Peeps, I'm back. Hello, family. Welcome to my channel. Today, I wanted to do another blog. I guess I'm gonna be. I saw this really quite interesting article. I love this picture here. Very pretty. Um, when I was doing my other video, I was talking about how it's important to have insight, spiritual, some sort of spiritual insight. I think as African Americans, aka the Aboriginal Americans, I think African American being called African American is a misnomer. And when we got indoctrinated, our ancestors and you know us today, we have lost a lot of our culture and our indigenous roots. So I think it's very important to reconnect to our roots. But I saw this really interesting article, which was really good, and I'm gonna read it. And I didn't read the whole thing, but I sort of skimmed through it. But it says here the title is "The Power of Indigenous Insight," and I was talking about. I think in the previous video that I was talking about, um, the very last video I did about the research study on the reclassification of the races in the United States. I touched on insight, and I think that's what's missing with us being African American. When we lost our indigenous heritage as Aborigine Indians here in the Americas, we lost a lot of our indigenous roots and heritage, and the belief of insight, the learning of insight. Because I noticed that there's a lot of indigenous cultures, especially in Australia, how they do a lot of things, looking at dreams, looking at astrology. Those are things that looks further into learning more about yourself and being more self-aware. We are not taught that in this Christians. When we was indoctrinated into Christianity, we lost a lot of that teaching because it was considered bad or wrong. But when you think about it, if you look in the Bible, Jesus Christ was found by the three wise men. And when the three wise men found him when he was in a manger as a baby, they followed the stars. They used astrology just to find him. The stars told them that he was about to be born. So, yes, astrology is very important. I believe dreams are very important. And I think using our intuition is very important. And I think we lost that because a lot of time in Christianity in the church, they tell you, oh, you're not supposed to use mediums like such as astrology, or you shouldn't listen to your dreams. Something wrong with you if you listen to your dreams and stuff, or some foolishness, because they want you to just listen to what the preachers say, as if the preacher is the only one that can guide you. And I think sometimes that's a personal feeling, and that's something that you have to go from within to get and tap into. And like I said, the power of insight is very important because we lost the power of using intuition. And I think that's how we always got to be now. And I know ancestors, but I can go on and on about it. But I'm going to read this article. It says here, I think the person's name is Blaskova. I guess that's how you pronounce it. And it was posted on November 13, 2007. It says this week's reading, Indigenous People Cultural Losses by Robert Figueroa, highlights how climate change is affecting the lives of indigenous communities. Yes, it is. Having taken an anthropology class previously, I know a little bit about the loss of culture more specifically, the loss of language in indigenous communities. However, I never looked at the loss of language and culture through the environment and the justice lens. And that's true. And that's what's been lost by us, Aborigines. We lost our language and our culture. And I think, too, when you use your culture, your language, you tap into your frequencies. And the English language is a foreign language to us because it's mostly European, and it doesn't really tap into who we really are as people. And so if you're constantly using their language and they made all the definitions of how things are applied, especially when it comes to the labeling system of the human race, which I've done some videos on, you tap in further into the frequencies because it's based on their way of thinking and their way of thinking and their historical knowledge of their and the origins of their language. And I think that's very important because when you know, words are very powerful, and that's why it's important to know what your language is, so you can apply the language and the meaning behind it, and improve the higher rate of frequencies and blessings that come their way. And maybe I'm hoping I'm making some sense to you all. Maybe I'm reading things a lot more deeper, but I guess I'm looking at a higher sense of an awareness and from a spiritual and also in a psychological point of view. And speaking of language, I also want to mention too that um, they, my tribe is Cherokee and Creek Indian, according to what my grandmother's always told me. Thank you, Grandma Abel. Thank you. But anyway, she told us that's our language and our culture. I meant to say our indigenous tribe that we are tied to or linked to. But I also been doing some research on the tribe and learning about the Cherokees and learning that their language is stemmed from the Hebrew language. There's some sort of connection between the Cherokee language and Hebrew. And there's a possibility that they spoke that particular language, according to the anthropology work. And I can see how what this author is saying ties into what's going on here with the Aborigines today and the identity crisis that we're facing today because of the paper genocide that took place in this country centuries ago, all the way up to today. It says, I think one of the worst impacts of climate change is how it hurts indigenous communities. The fact that we truly have nothing to do with climate change, yet we are most affected is terrible. As a society so easily ignored, indigenous communities don't consider the impact of our actions on them because they're almost looked down upon. People assume that just because they are indigenous that they must not be advanced or capable people living in a large city. However, indigenous communities can offer any layer of understanding of climate change issues and offer a rich culture that should be cherished, not ignored. I think that both are the most, and even though indigenous communities are being most affected by the climate change, they're still included in the conversations about policies to combat climate change. The people who are actually experiencing the impacts of climate change should have a say in policies that will ultimately affect them. Exactly. A lot of these laws and stuff that they pass and regulations do affect the indigenous people. It affected them in the past and it have affected them today. They don't get the feedback from the indigenous people. And when histories are lost, people don't lose their identity. And when histories are lost, we don't learn the old ways of how things should be done and how to take care of this planet. That is so true. Well, let's continue. It says, furthermore, I thought that sessions about climate refugees was also very interesting. A common tactic to save people from climate change is to relocate them to somewhere where they won't be affected by the damage. While relocation does not disturb culture too much when people in the U.S. are relocated somewhere else in the U.S., it can completely destroy culture if indigenous communities are moved, and that's exactly what happened here. Wow. A large part of the indigenous culture is the environment they live in and plants and other nature that is found there. I think that is a great example why indigenous people should be included in the climate change conversation. If they have presence, if they've been present in location discussions, they will have said how relocating them will liberate their culture. Indigenous communities should have a say in what happens to their community once their environment becomes uninhabitable. I know we as Americans expect that kind of sovereignty for ourselves, so indigenous communities should be given the same sovereignty. And I think it's quite interesting he used Americans. I wonder if this is a white author. I'm not sure what ethnicity they are, but it's true. Um, it's I guess they're talking about the Native Americans right now, and this article was because they're the only ones that are allowed to hold on to their indigenous root. But we as African Americans, aka Aborigines, are starting to look back at possibly, wanting to go back into our indigenous roots that was stripped of us due to all these crazy laws and paper genocides that was applied to us to ensure that we never have any knowledge as to our true indigenous heritage. So, yeah, it's true. And all moving people around and reclassifying, we were going to reclassify so many times, it does not make no sense. And like I said, African American is a misnomer, and we should not even be called that as far as I'm concerned, because we're not from Africa. We weren't born there, and our ancestors not from there. Maybe thousands upon thousands of years ago, but most of us are indigenous here to the Americas. And our existence as a people is an example of how our indigenous heritage has been stripped. And when we don't have a voice, it's easier for policies to take place, and for government and officials to people who are in these positions that are voted in make all these decisions that make changes that affect people as a whole. And when you don't listen to the indigenous people who are more knowledgeable about the land, you just bound to go to failure, because the primary or the main population, their goal, the only interest they have is money and resources, just getting money. And indigenous people is loving and appreciating and valuing Mother Earth and the land, and being able to share. And that's how it should be. I think it's enough to go around for everyone, but it's only 1% that, small elite that wants it all for themselves. And unfortunately, we can really learn from the indigenous, and I agree. And with us as African Americans, aka Aboriginal Americans, we should return back to our indigenous roots and learn from our elders, do our own research and trace our roots, and go back to our old ways. I think that's so needed. We need to return to nature and return. Somebody does, and put a stop to all this expansion of tearing up the earth with companies and rich elites and only 1% of the population making decisions for the vast, and everything is geared only to a select gray population. But yeah, I thought this was an interesting article, and that's true. We do need to learn more from the indigenous roots, and especially African American. It is a part of our heritage, and that we are so removed from, but we should definitely reconnect and learn more about it. And I see the importance of it, especially with the way global warming, how the earth is being destroyed by companies and corporate interests of special elite groups who want to hoard money and resources for themselves. It's a real big problem. It really is. And learning the old ways, the knowledge of the indigenous is very important. I know certain great elites know that these indigenous knowledge and wisdoms are very powerful, and they don't want the us to have access to this knowledge because they want to hoard everything to themselves. But the rightful people, we as the African American Aborigines, should have access to these knowledge. And by reading, a lot of it is in books and doing our own research and connecting back to it. And it's very important. Learning all these indigenous knowledge and having more the power and insight through spirituality and culture and heritage is very important. But I can go on and on and on. I just love to see what you all think. What do you think of indigenous insight? Do you think it's important? Do you think it's something that we as African Americans are lacking? Um, and do you have any suggestions on how to reconnect to that? Please like this video and thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe. I am also on Black Junction TV. I'll have a link below, and you can please subscribe there as well. Please subscribe here on YouTube, and also I have my PayPal link, and also my GoFundMe link is also in the description below. And till next time, peace and be blessed. Bye bye.